Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session, and everybody zooming in from schools around Spain and around Europe. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us for this session with Peter Gaunt, who is one of the foremost experts on Oliver Cromwell in the United Kingdom, having written 14 books. Is that correct? Something like that.
Right. Something around that.
About Oliver Cromwell. And Peter is going to be answering questions today with all our students. And if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. We're obviously focusing on Cromwell, but if you have a question about Cromwell in the Civil War or anything associated with Oliver Cromwell, you are welcome to ask that. We can't show every single question. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So apologies if your question doesn't get selected to go on screen from the outset, but we will try and cover as many as we can. So Peter, I'm going to start off with a question from me, which is, can you tell us a little bit about where Oliver Cromwell was born and raised?
He was born in 1599, and he was born in Huntingdon, which is in East Anglia. It's north of London. It's about 60, 70 miles north of London. So he's born in the provinces, in the countryside. He's born into a family, the Cromwell family, which for a time was quite rich and wealthy. But by the time he was born, the Cromwell family was in decline. It had overspent. And what's worse, Oliver Cromwell's own family was a younger son of many sons. So the Cromwell wealth, not much of it, came to Oliver himself. He was what we call a gentleman, a member of the gentry. He was a member of the landed elite, or he was born into a landed elite family, but not very rich. He was quite low on that landed elite spectrum. He was had a standard. We don't know much about his childhood. Very little evidence remains. He went to the local grammar school, so he would have got a decent education. He would have learned Latin, maybe a bit of Greek. He went on to one of the two English universities at that time, which was Cambridge, quite close to where he was born. But he only studied there quite briefly. He didn't get a degree. His father died quite young, probably quite suddenly. So he left Cambridge without completing his studies. He was effectively the only son by that time to run his father's estates and to take over, looking after his widowed mother. And he had quite a few sisters. He had no brothers, but he had quite a few sisters.
Brilliant. That was a really nice overview to start off. I wanted to ask you a little bit before we turn to the questions that people are asking. What was his person? Do we know anything about his personality? What he was actually like as a guy?
We only get information about his personality really from later in life, from the 1640s, once the Civil War begins. And that's when we get much more information about Cromwell, including from his own letters and speeches. So what can we put together? He was a very religious man. He'd gone through a religious conversion. He thought he was in tune with God. He thought God had a special message for him, a special duty that Cromwell needed to perform for God. He was quite intelligent in terms of his letters and speeches. He could obviously write well. He could talk well. He gave stand-up speeches lasting 2 or 3 hours with very few notes. So he was very, very lucid, very good at putting words together. He had a dry sense of humor. We know he liked throwing cushions or flicking ink over people. So he had even as an adult, he had a rather strange, quirky sense of humor. He seemed to get on well with people. He was quite warm. His interpersonal skills, his interactions with other people, he seems to have been far better at that than, say, King Charles I, who was quite cold and reserved. He was a much warmer person. He tried to get on with people wherever possible, or at least that's my interpretation. Now, I should warn you, always be careful of the historian. No historian is unbiased. Cromwell is one of my heroes. I have been in the past president of the Cromwell Association. When I start talking to my undergraduates, the very first lesson I give my undergraduates is question what you're hearing. Don't trust even a professor. Even professors with an honest face, there's an agenda going on. But for what it's worth, that's my view, fairly positive view of Cromwell. It's only fair to say that some other historians would probably be more critical and negative.
Well, I think, and my student, by the way, my students are in the class here. So if any of my students are brave enough, you can actually speak. You can actually shout a question. That's fine. You know, I'm looking at some of you. If you want to, you can say it, right? But a lot of my students, I did say to them last week, Peter, I said, you can challenge Peter. You can challenge his interpretation. So he's just said that he thinks Cromwell was, well, he's a hero of yours.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's his interpretation. It's a valid interpretation, but of course, interpretations can be challenged, or can be, we can ask questions about them as historians and think about them.
And I've seen in the comments on the right a couple of questions that have already challenged me. One is, what about all the Irish people he killed? And that's a very good point. Cromwell was a radical Protestant. He was anti-Catholic. And I'm aware I'm talking to people in Spain. Yes, I haven't forgotten that. He's anti-Catholic. He's particularly anti-Irish Catholic, though there is a reason for that. And that is that the Irish Catholic population had risen up in rebellion in 1641. And that resulted in the killing of lots of Protestants in Ireland. So Cromwell, not the most attractive side of him, sees himself as some sort of an avenging angel when he launches his campaign in Ireland after the English civil wars are over, 1649 to 1650. And at Drogheda and at Wexford, lots of Irish Catholics who had opposed him in arms were killed. However, I would add two riders to that. And at Drogheda, which is not far from Dublin in Ireland, actually the main garrison opposing him was Protestant, and they died as well when they were captured. So he wasn't just anti-Catholic in unleashing his army there, but also he's obeying the rules of war as they were understood at the time and as they applied in the 30 Years' War across the continent of Europe. Once you've besieged a stronghold, surrounded it, you give the opponents one chance to surrender on terms, in which case they all live. If they don't surrender, and that stronghold, town, castle, fort is then captured, there is no mercy. They're all to be killed. And that's the rules of war in the 17th century. It was applied by both sides, the Protestant armies and the Catholic armies. And what Cromwell does, unusually, in Ireland in 1649, is applying those rules of war, although in a very brutal way.
Somebody asked, and I think this is particularly for Drogheda, is Carlos and Mateo asked, how many people did he kill? I think this is Manuel from our class.
Yeah. All right.
Well, he may have got it wrong. I think. I mean, in that particular instant, how many people did he kill? Okay.
First of all, who dies? The defending garrison. Most of those are killed. Civilians, adult males who are found in arms supporting the garrison, they are killed, by and large. There is no evidence that women and children are deliberately killed. Some of them take boat to try and escape, and that boat is overloaded and it capsizes, and some of them drown, but that's not deliberate. Cromwell didn't do that. So we need to make the point that it isn't completely indiscriminate killing, even at Drogheda and Wexford, it's mainly adult males who die. And it runs, we don't know the exact number, they're disputed, but it runs into the low thousands. If you add Drogheda and Wexford together, I think I noticed in the chat box, someone suggested 3,500. If you add them together, it's probably around that number. It's probably in the low thousands.
Mr. Provost, my colleague from IPS, has asked, why did Cromwell order the murder of the garrison at Wexford despite them surrendering after being offered their lives?
Well, now, they were surrounded, they were offered a chance to surrender, and they refused. And they held out, and Cromwell then bombarded. He used his big guns, his artillery, to attack the town. Having been softened up a bit, the garrison then said, oh, we've changed our minds. Can we negotiate a surrender? Cromwell didn't have to stop at that point, but he did call a halt and open negotiations. But some of the defenders at Wexford started throwing down their arms, and they let in Cromwell's soldiers, and the military discipline broke down. I think Wexford is different from Drogheda. Drogheda, Cromwell takes a conscious decision. The defenders, all those found in arms, will be killed. No mercy. I don't think he does at Wexford. I think he was opening negotiations for a more orderly handover, but because the garrison lost heart and threw down, or some of them did, and Cromwell's troops got in, military order broke down. So I think they're actually slightly different, even though the upshot is lots of people were killed. And thereafter, although Cromwell campaigns for another 6-8 months in Ireland through until spring, early summer 1650, there's nothing like that thereafter, we should note. After Drogheda and Wexford, which come at the start of his Irish campaign, other strongholds are allowed to negotiate an orderly surrender. That orderly surrender is accepted. There's hardly any loss of life.
And did he, because I've sort of looked into this a little bit, I'm by far not an expert on it, but the reasons he went over to Ireland in the first place, can you sort of just outline those briefly as to why he went there in the first place?
Okay. The 1641, we're going back to 1641, the majority Catholic population rise up in rebellion against English Protestant rule. That rebellion is successful. The Irish Catholics seize control of most of Ireland. And in the process, they kill large numbers of Protestants there, of English, Welsh, and Scottish descent. Both England and Scotland want to reverse that and restore what they see as order. In other words, their control over Ireland. For a long time, because of the English Civil War, that can't happen. It's delayed. Neither England nor Scotland can mount a campaign there during the 1640s because they're involved in the Civil War. So Cromwell is sent to Ireland in 1649 to head an English military expedition because there's unfinished business in Ireland and they want to reverse the consequences of the Irish Rebellion of October 1641, which they do successfully, brutally, with considerable harshness. And
and children were the women and children enslaved?
No, by and large they weren't. A few were sent as indented servants, which isn't quite what we would understand by slavery. They're sent as indented servants to the colonies, where they work for a time compulsorily for another landowner, but then they secure their freedom. And although it's very poorly documented, some of them, men, women, and children, almost certainly become landowners themselves in Jamaica and other growing English colonies.
Do you think the deaths Cromwell caused in Drogheda can be justified?
Okay, mass deaths of people can always leave us uncomfortable, can never be condoned. Under the rules of war, the very brutal rules of war as they applied in the 17th century, it was certainly justified. The English historian Christopher Hill has drawn a parallel between Drogheda and Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Can I just relay that to my students so they understand? Another historian, not Peter, Christopher Hill, correct me if I'm wrong in this description, by the way, Peter, has said that Cromwell's actions in Drogheda were similar to the Americans dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima in Japan in 1945. Is that correct?
Yes.
Peter?
Yep. So large
numbers. You disagree with that. I'm guessing you disagree with the equation.
Japanese men, women, and children, civilians overwhelmingly died horrible deaths. But overall, it was to shorten the war. And overall, the balance sheet was fewer people would have been killed than if Allied troops had to fight their way into and through Japan. And Christopher Hill's argument is that on balance, terrible though Drogheda, Hiroshima, and so on Nagasaki were, on balance, they probably meant that fewer people were killed in the long run.
Okay, got another question here, which is slightly off the topic here.
Loads have come through. Oh, not on Ireland, but there we are.
Yana asks, do you think it's weird that he wanted more power for Parliament because he thought it was fairer and then disbanded it for being corrupt?
Cromwell never loses his faith in Parliament and in a representative assembly. He keeps on when he's a statesman, a senior politician, a Lord Protector in the 1650s. He keeps on calling parliaments. When he becomes Lord Protector, the meeting of a parliament every so often is a key part of the written constitution. It's the only time in our history, English history, we've had a written constitution, and it's part of it, and he obeys it. Now, he falls out with parliaments. He doesn't work well with parliaments. He's an idealist, I think, too much. And when he meets the MPs, they don't always fall in with his fairly lofty ideals of godly reformation. So he falls out with a succession of parliaments. But I think even to his dying day, he had a faith in, we wouldn't call it democracy because not everyone had the vote. No women, the landless didn't have the vote. So it's not democracy. That would be a wrong term. But he believed in representative government. He believed in checks and balances. And his constitutional thinking, such as it was, always had a place for Parliament and a representative assembly, even if in practice, time and again, he falls out with the long Parliament, with its rump, with the nominated assembly, and with both his protectorate parliaments.
Did Cromwell himself fight in battles? Was he, you know, he was like a soldier general, wasn't he?
Yes. Cromwell, he commands directly in battle. He fights from the front. He takes a direct leading role in battles. He's a cavalryman, so he fights on horseback. He's not an infantryman. He doesn't fight on foot. So he commands the cavalry wing, the mounted wing on horses of the army, and he leads that cavalry wing directly from the front in many cases. He nearly gets killed at one battle, the Battle of Winceby, early in the Civil War, and he's perhaps lucky to escape alive. And we know that he, in a way, he's lucky, but he suffers minor wounds in a couple of other battles. The Battle of Marston Moor, he's wounded somewhere in the neck, not seriously, and later portraits don't really show a scar there, but he does suffer some wounds. So yes, he's very much a hands-on officer and general. he leads from the front. He takes command of his men.
And as leader of the country after the civil wars, he allowed Jewish people to he basically had more freedom for Jewish people in England, didn't he? So can you tell us a bit about that and why? What were the driving factors in that?
Well, in the 1650s, Cromwell wants to be inclusive, not exclusive. He wants to bring people together. He believes that all the different types of Protestants who had emerged by then, there are different Protestant groups that emerged during the Civil War. They all have an element of God's truth within them. But he probably believed, he seems to have believed, that the Jews too were in tune with God, with the Christian God, and they too had an element of God's truth within them. And that's one of the reasons why he sets up a committee, which includes legal experts, to review the legal situation. What's the current legal situation within England? Is it possible for Jews to settle and worship and work in England? And the judges, they're a bit uncertain. They don't give Cromwell the absolute ringing thumbs up that he wanted. But on the whole, Cromwell comes to the conclusion that there's nothing in the existing laws to bar Jews from coming to England, settling in England, worshipping in their own synagogues, and indeed working. So it's often called the readmission of the Jews. That's perhaps not quite an accurate title. Cromwell confirms their right to take up residence and to live in England. And they're scattered around. The biggest population by far is in London.
This is a good question, right? Because again, my class here have watched this movie, watched all the different bits of the movie, right? And you don't like the movie. So we've been watching some bits of Cromwell. It was produced, I think, in the 1960s, 70s. So the question is the Oliver Cromwell film historically accurate?
No.
And is it a good information source?
Oh, the number of mistakes in that film. We're talking about the film starring the Irishman, which is interesting, Richard Harris as Cromwell, who was drunk for most of the filming. They had to sober him up, apparently, allegedly. He was a heavy drinker. We know that. It's an interesting portrayal, but there are so many mistakes. There are so many mistakes in it historically. Let's just pick on some of them. The 5 members in January 1642, Charles I tried to arrest 5 leading MPs who had criticised him. And the film shows Cromwell as one of those 5. He wasn't. In January 1642, Cromwell was a fairly insignificant backbencher. He wasn't a significant politician. We have Prince Rupert, the royalist Prince Rupert.
He did have the dog.
With some silly little toy poodle in his arms.
But he did have Boy the dog.
Yes, he did. But Boy the dog was a big, big hunting poodle. Little miniature toy poodles don't come in until the 19th, 20th century. And Rupert wouldn't have been seen dead with some little toy poodle. His was a big, ferocious hunting dog. And we've got pictures of it.
Do you know what, Peter, though? I'm gonna forgive the movie for the size of the dog. I'm gonna forgive the movie for the size of the dog.
Okay. All right. Let's have one more and then we'll move on. It shows in late 1644, it shows that Oliver Cromwell had fallen out with and was arguing with the Earl of Manchester, which is perfectly true. They did.
Yeah.
They had different approaches. But it shows them sitting in the same chamber of Parliament, shouting at each other. Cromwell was an MP. He sat in the House of Commons. The Earl of Manchester was an earl. He was a noble. He sat in the House of Lords. They're not sitting together in the same chamber having a row. There are so many mistakes.
It's interesting,
I warn my students against that film.
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. I think as a source, it's interesting, because it does give. I mean, there's not that many sort of movies and stuff like that about the Civil War, so it does. At least it gives you something.
It gives you something. Yeah, it gives you something.
Okay, we've got. Let me pick another one. Do you? I mean, this is. I guess when you were saying he was a product of his time, do you think
No.
Do you think his morals would be correct in society today?
I think he would be very much out of tune in society today. Cromwell was very religious. He believed in a Christian Protestant God who was very active in the world. He believed that God directly shaped events in the world. He believed that we have a duty to God. He believed passionately in what he called godly reformation. And that is the idea that Parliament and politicians should push through various reforms to be in tune with God. So clamping down on alehouses, clamping down on brothels, clamping down on sex outside marriage, clamping down on swearing, all those sort of things. I can't see any politician. We had our own Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who was personally very religious. But when he became Prime Minister, he backed away from all of that. We don't do God, we don't talk God, he said. He knew that if he tried to introduce his own very personal faith into politics and into the policies of government, he would quickly lose support. And Cromwell would be completely out of touch in that sense. He would be out of his time. Morally, he would be, I think he'd stick to his morals passionately, such was his belief and the strength of his belief. But I think in today's society, he would be way, way out of touch.
This is a question from Sophia. Do you think your opinion of Cromwell is influenced by you being the president of the Cromwell Association? I mean, you pretty much addressed that at the beginning, is that you believe that Cromwell is a hero of yours. So it's
it was the other way around. I was made president of the Cromwell Association because of my work on Cromwell. And right from the outset, when I first started studying Cromwell, which I did as an undergraduate and as a sixth former, but I did my doctorate, my PhD, on part of Cromwell's government in the 1650s. And that was long before I became president of the Cromwell Association. So it was the other way around. I became president because of my work on and support for Cromwell. And you could say something similar about Cromwell. Cromwell becomes a senior politician only because of his military background. His military rise is very much driven, his political rise, rather, is very much driven by his earlier military success. If Cromwell hadn't been good on the battlefield, and I've seen lots of questions whipping through about Cromwell and his military strategy, if Cromwell hadn't been so good and so successful as a Civil War general in the 1640s, he would never have got the political power and risen as high as he did to become Lord Protector in the 1650s, in the decade after the Civil War.
This is a good question. Was Cromwell wealthy at his death, and was he liked by the English people when he died? From Harry and Adam.
We don't have a will. Cromwell dies in 1658, almost certainly of natural causes. There is no surviving will listing all his property and income. So we have to work it out. But certainly by the 1650s, he had acquired a lot of properties spread across much of England and Wales. He was earning a very high salary as a senior officer and as Lord General, Commander-in-Chief of the parliamentarian armies. So he would have died a very wealthy man, very rich. Was he liked by the English people when he died? I think they accepted him. They acquiesced with him as Lord Protector, but I don't think many of them really loved him and were devoted to him. He's given a state funeral and they go through the motions, but it's not like the outpouring that you see with the deaths of some figures. I mean, we've recently lost Elizabeth II. I think she was probably held in a higher regard at her death than Cromwell was. I'm old enough to remember the death of Lady Di, Diana, Princess of Wales, the wild outpouring of emotion when she was killed in a car accident. Nothing like that when Cromwell dies in 1658. No, he is not held in that high regard by the broad mass of the people.
Let's have a look. We've also got, I mean, you've sort of already answered this one. Was Cromwell good strategically at battle? And similar.
I think he was very good at battle. He knew what to do. He disciplined his men. They were well trained. He was able to keep tight command of his men on the battlefield. And what he does time and again, commit the minimum number of his own troops to break the opposing cavalry, the royalist cavalry. And once he'd done that and pushed them off the battlefield, he then uses his own cavalry to turn against the now unprotected and vulnerable royalist foot soldiers and complete the victory. He's very good at that. What Cromwell isn't so good at, another aspect of the Civil War, are sieges. Besieging and capturing royalist-held castles and fortified towns. Cromwell isn't so good there. His record is a bit mixed. He's too impatient. He's not good at playing the long game, at starving out enemy strongholds. He wants it over quickly. And sometimes he tries to attack too early. And that we see that in England. We see that when he fights in Wales. We see that towards the end of his Irish campaign, when he makes a real mess of trying to capture the Irish stronghold of Clonmel. It's the blackest day for the New Model Army. 1,500, 2,000 New Model Army troops killed when they try to attack Clonmel too early. He's not so good in sieges. Overall, he's probably on balance the most successful general on either side in the civil wars, but he's not absolutely brilliant. There are some flaws and some weaknesses in his military command.
Fernando is asking, why did he hate Catholics?
Anti-Catholicism is very, very strong in 17th century England. Catholics in general, the Pope in particular, are seen as the enemy. We go back to 1588, the Spanish Armada. We go back to 1605, the Gunpowder Plot. There's a huge amount of propaganda that English Protestants believe that Catholics are the enemy. They will try and destroy the English state, the English Protestant church, the English government. And Cromwell buys into that. He is a radical Protestant. He goes through in the 1630s. He's brought up a Protestant. He's a Calvinist. He accepts those views. But then in the 1630s, his Protestantism becomes even hotter. He goes through some sort of a conversion experience where he thinks God has picked him out for a special purpose. And that probably intensifies his anti-Catholicism. The Irish Rebellion, the Irish Catholic Rebellion of October 1641, emphasizes and exacerbates that even more. All I would say is that when he becomes Lord Protector for 5 years, and he rules England, Wales, Scotland, as well as Ireland, in England and Wales, Catholics are not persecuted. The anti-Catholic laws really aren't enforced very harshly. As far as we can see, only one English Catholic was executed during the 5 years of his protectorate. And there's even a suggestion that that Catholic was given a chance to go abroad to depart and decided not to do it. So his anti-Catholicism, which is certainly there, is certainly vicious, though maybe justified in Ireland. I'd say when he becomes head of state, his anti-Catholicism, there are limits to it. He's not as bad on English and Welsh Catholics, or Scottish Catholics for that matter, as you might think he would be. There is a degree of toleration and inclusivity there.
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense. Mr. Provins again asked a good question. Oh, there it is, Mr. Provis, sorry, from IPS. What do you think was Cromwell's biggest regret?
Oh, that's very difficult. And in none of his letters and speeches does he really give a clue. He makes clear that he's made mistakes. He regrets trying the nominated assembly, a sort of parliament that's non-elected in 1653. It was a good idea, he said, but it didn't go well. I regret that. It was a mistake. He probably didn't want the execution of the king for most of the civil wars. But he does come round to seeing that the only way of establishing peace is to get rid of the king and to get rid of monarchy. So I don't think and when he spoke about the trial and execution of the king afterwards, he never expressed much regret about that. I think he would have regretted, and we do get hints of this in some of his speeches, he regrets that when he extends religious toleration to all groups of Protestants in England, they take advantage of that toleration, but they don't tolerate others. So Protestant groups attack and fall out with other Protestant groups. The Baptists fall out with the Quakers, they fall out with the Presbyterians. He regrets that people don't have the spirit of God's love within them to accept other people with slightly different faiths. I think he probably did regret that he couldn't work with parliaments, that his relationship with Parliament always turns wrong, always turns bad, always turns fraught. And if there's a regret on his deathbed, and he doesn't really express it on his deathbed, but if there's a regret on his deathbed, I suspect he realizes that godly reformation, pushing through reforms to make England less sinful, to bring it closer to God and God's will, that program really hasn't made very much progress during the 1650s, and it hasn't won the support of a broad swathe of the political nation.
This is a good one. Why did he hate Christmas?
Well, and I noticed earlier, one of the questions that whipped through on the right was, why did Cromwell abolish Christmas? He didn't actually abolish Christmas. The vote to abolish Christmas was taken by the Long Parliament in the mid-1640s. And indeed, he was probably away on campaign. Although he was an MP, he probably wasn't actually sitting in the House of Commons when the key vote were taken, though he does generally support it. Why does he dislike Christmas? I think there are a number of reasons. There's lots of sin in the celebration of Christmas. All the drunkenness, fornication going on. That's not the way to do it. People like him say that there is nothing in the Bible explicitly to say that Christ's nativity should be celebrated, certainly not in the way that Christmas was celebrated by the 17th century. He associates Christmas and other religious festivals with Catholicism. So Christ's Mass, he associates that with old Catholic hangovers. And Cromwell is one of those who believes that the English Protestant Reformation hadn't gone far enough, that when Elizabeth I re-established the Protestant Church in the beginning of her reign, in the very late 1550s, she hadn't gone far enough in distancing the Protestant Church of England away from the previous medieval Catholic English Church. And Christmas, the celebration of Christmas, was one of those festivals that Cromwell and others, he's not alone in this, associate with elements of Catholicism that should have been removed at the Reformation. He's not against non-working days. He believes in that. Days of fasting and prayer. They're far more to his taste than drunkenness and fornication in the pub on Christmas Day.
During the battles he fought in, did Oliver Cromwell use advanced technology and tactics? Did he use any memorable tactics or weapons?
No, I don't think he was a military revolutionary. England had been at peace for many decades before the Civil War. So Civil War armies as a whole, both royalists and parliamentarians, were catching up. They were introducing some of the weaponry and some of the use of those weaponry and tactics that had been seen in the 30 Years' War, that had been seen in Gustavus Adolphus's campaigns leading the Swedish army and so on. So I don't think Cromwell was a revolutionary in that sense. What he focuses on, training, discipline, the Civil War armies in general, they use cavalry charges, close rank cavalry charges, charging into their enemies to break the opposing cavalry. The infantry wing, Cromwell isn't really an infantry commander, the infantry wing use muskets in a more advanced way to fire a musket, and then another rank comes up and firing by rows, so they're able to maintain musket fire. So as a whole, and they use artillery pieces, field artillery as well as siege pieces, but there's no real revolutionary aspect there in terms of Europe. England, both the royalist and the parliamentarian armies, royalist generals as well as parliamentarian armies, are really just catching up with what some historians refer to as a military revolution that had occurred on the continent of Europe in the 16th and early 17th centuries, seen in the Dutch Revolt, as well as Sweden, particularly in the 30 Years' War.
Did Cromwell have any hobbies?
He liked horses. He was a skilled rider. He obviously appreciated horses. Ambassadors knew one way to get round Cromwell was to gift him a really nice thoroughbred horse. So he appreciated horses. He liked riding, probably hawking as well, use of hawks, hunting birds. He liked those. Probably not much of a reader. He read some books. Obviously, he was literate. He recommended history, particularly to his son, reading Sir Walter Raleigh's History of the World. But beyond that, I don't think we have record of any particular hobbies that Cromwell indulged in. He appreciated art. He liked art and objects of art. He's nowhere near the connoisseur that Charles I was, but when he becomes Lord Protector, he does have some of the palaces that he uses redecorated with some of the surviving royal art. So he appreciates art, or some art, but he's not really a connoisseur or a collector in the way that Charles I had been.
Coming towards the end now, Peter, it's been absolutely fantastic. I just want to ask you, the whole hero-villain thing, right? Oliver Cromwell, hero-villain, or I mean, I find that very like a dichotomy of sort of good, evil sort of thing. Maybe it's much more nuanced, isn't it? But let's imagine we're sticking with that, the whole hero thing. Can you just outline, to summarize and to finish, for my class, who's been fantastic, and for everyone else watching, what are your key reasons as to why you think Oliver Cromwell was a hero?
Okay. Why is he a hero? He's a hero because he was such a good military leader. Not a revolutionary military leader, but he was so competent. He was the most successful on either side. He played a large part. Wasn't a one-man band, but he played a large part in securing the parliamentarian victory in the civil wars. And one of the questions that has whipped through on the right was what role did he play in Parliament's victory? I think a crucial role. Without him, Parliament probably had inbuilt advantages that would have won the war, but it would have taken longer and been a harder slog. Cromwell then becomes a statesman. He becomes a political leader. And as a political leader in the 1650s, he's inclusive. He tries to bring the country back together. He tries to heal and settle the wounds of the Civil War, one of his favorite phrases. I am much attracted to healing and settling. And that's good. He never becomes a sort of bloated military dictator of the likes of Idi Amin or the leaders of the... he doesn't become a Stalin, for example, the leader of the Russian Revolution. So as a revolutionary leader, he then becomes a fairly moderate, inclusive political leader with good intentions. And he's held in check as a political leader because of his Christian moral compass, his belief in what God wants. And whether or not we share that belief, I think we should and can and should appreciate that it holds Cromwell in check and does give him some noble, if in the end perhaps unrealistic, goals during the 1650s. I would also say that Cromwell at times could be radical. He was instrumental in getting rid of monarchy. He was instrumental in getting rid of the House of Lords. He was instrumental in getting rid of bishops and the Church of England. And if you're on the left in politics, and if you're a radical, you probably admire Cromwell for those sort of achievements, again, that he participated in, had a role in. So overall, my view is Cromwell far more hero than villain, though I am very well aware of some dark sides and unfortunate episodes in his life and career. And I emphasize again that there are others who would take a different view. And I would strongly recommend the Professor of History at the University of Bristol, Ronald Hutton. He's 2/3 of the way through a 3-part biography of Cromwell. Third part is yet to appear. I think it's very fair and balanced. He takes a far more critical view of Cromwell. And if you don't like the generally positive spin I put on Cromwell over the last 45, 50 minutes, if you want to read something very interesting that puts Cromwell in a different light, I would strongly recommend Ronald Hutton's recent biography of Cromwell. Well worth it.
Very quickly, Peter, because I'll get in trouble if I don't read out this question from Tiago. Mr. Gaunt, do you think the event of the Civil War had a similar impact, or at least comparable, to the French Revolution? They had a lot of similarities, like the fact that people started to go against the king.
They do. Indeed, one of the lectures that I used to give here was to compare the origins, course and consequences of the English Civil War, or English Revolution, if you want to call it that, with the French Revolution. And I think there are a lot of similarities. Probably too many at 5 to 12 my time, 5 to 1 your time, to go into in great detail. But I think it is interesting. Now, Napoleon is a very different figure from Cromwell for all sorts of reasons. He is not impelled by the sort of religious motivation as overtly and clearly as Cromwell. And that's not part of it. But if we think about what Napoleon did, the role he played as a general, but then how he went on to become head of state in the post-military period, the post-revolutionary period, and some of the policies that he tried to pursue as Emperor of France, I think there are comparisons, some interesting comparisons as well as contrasts to be drawn. And I try, although it's a lot for them to take in, to get my students to think about that. Compare and contrast Cromwell and Napoleon, compare and contrast the English and French revolutions. I think it is very instructive. And I happen to know that there's work going on by someone I know who's looking at that, a French revolutionary expert, who's then extending back to the English Civil War, which is a learning curve for him, looking and picking up some of those links and comparisons as well as contrasts.
Right, Peter, thanks ever so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. It was really, really good. Thanks to all the students who've joined in today. Some really, really good questions. And yeah, we'll speak soon. Again, thanks,
Okay.
Peter.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
Adios.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.